discussion continues, taking apart the various things that have been said about the big national issues that are at hand in the coming week and in the recent past, and what exactly those positions mean for you as a person. Now, we want to start off with something that has happened recently. Now, President Uhuru Kenyatta on Saturday dismissed calls for any form of dialogue on electoral reforms with the National Super Alliance, NASA, leaders, saying that time for politics is over and that the leaders must now focus on delivering development promises to Kenyans. He told NASA leaders to wait until the year 2022 to negotiate with, DP William Ruto. Take a look.
Mimi ningeuliza viongozi wote, sisi ambao tuko kwa serikali au chama ambacho ni tawala sasa cha Jubilee, na hata wenzetu ambao wako kwa upinzani, inafika wakati ambapo tuwasema siasa zitoshe. Tuungane pamoja, tufanyie wa Kenya kazi. Kwa sababu that is what Kenyans now want. They want to see our country transformed. They want to see our country moving forward. And that is the dialogue we want to be participating and engaging in. That dialogue that transforms lives, that brings development. Lakini hii ya kuongea masiasa, hii gojee 2022, mtaongea na William, mimi nitakuwa naenda nyumbani.
Well, gentlemen, straight from the horse's mouth, that time for politics is over, literally accept and move on, that there will be time for political bargaining in the year, 2022. And Dismas, I want to throw this to you, the fact that for most people, this discussion is about divvying up the national cake, national resources, talking about the fact that for Kenyans, it is a winner takes it all and loser loses it all situation. And also the fact of the matter that dividing the national cake is also very important to know how then you continue to bake a new cake. In this situation, what do you think is the way forward for NASA?
Well, one has to disagree with the president. Mm. And, you know, it's almost bad manners to disagree with the president, given the access he has to lots of information. Because he's got a global understanding of the nation Kenya, where we are and how we are supposed to be making progress. Mm-hmm. But going back to politics is not all about running for an office and winning. Politics is having a discussion on how you are going to distribute your national resources. That's the kind of politics which goes on through the day, every day. So politics does not come to an end after you cast your ballot. In fact, vigorous politics begins the moment you cast your ballot. You've elected people to the various assemblies, and you want to understand how they're going to distribute the national cake. For instance, at the National Assembly in Nairobi, they're going to create a budget for roads. So it's important to understand how they're going to have a conversation on where to prioritize the roads. If you have about 50% of Kenyans who voted for Raila Odinga during the first round, the second round they decided to give it a wide berth, they feel they're not effectively represented in that decision-making process. Mm-hmm. That it's Jubilee which is going to take all the decisions, and there's no guarantee that when Jubilee takes these decisions, they'll be mindful of the entire nation.
I want to interrupt you there, and because President Uhuru Kenyatta, having been sworn in, then took an oath and swore to be president of all Kenyans, regardless whether they voted for him or not. And yet he comes out and says what he does, because this then would seem to be a hard stance, a grandstanding, literally digging in and saying that this is the position, it is not going to change. What then is in it for this in this government, for the Kenyans who feel disenfranchised because they either thought that the election was stolen or that there is no representation for them in this government?
For me, I wish to ask President Kenyatta with a lot of respect for him to review his decision.
Yes.
Because when he says he's going to close the door to dialogue, and we know that without dialogue, without talking, without having a conversation, we are not going to make progress. Even for Donald Trump at the US, when he was coming up with a new tax framework, he had to negotiate both with Republicans and Democrats. As the head of state, you've been sworn into office and you've said, I'm going to serve all Kenyans, irrespective of whether or not you voted for me, or whether you actually woke up in the morning to go and cast your ballot, whether or not you actually registered as a voter or anything. So the president must review that decision and have a conversation with Raila Odinga.
Yes.
And you know, it's very interesting that politicians in Kenya are very peculiar, as Michael Joseph put it at some stage. One day, President Kenyatta says, I'm open for a conversation. The following day, he does a a U-turn.
Yes.
At some stage, Raila Odinga says, I want a conversation, dialogue. A few hours later, he does a quick U-turn. So you begin to wonder, when you have our political leaders with a lot of power over the voters, over the citizens, when they keep on going around small circles, how do we make progress as a nation? Because for President Kenyatta, he must realize that we're in a crisis. And when you're in a crisis, you do not let the crisis just disappear. You have to talk, because the crisis is not going to fizzle into thin air.
Yes.
So President Kenyatta must review his position and invite Raila Odinga to a conversation and ask him, what are these issues that are pressing you? How can we sort them so that we make progress? Because as you've indicated, about 50% of Kenyans consider President Kenyatta to be illegitimate. Then how do you manage their fears? How do you manage their aspirations if you don't engage in a conversation? The last few days, you've seen members of the diplomatic corps. I mean, when you see Godek somewhere, believe you me, Godek is not moving on his own motion. He's been given a nudge by Donald Trump to ask these leaders to engage in a conversation. And the same with the team, the British High Commissioner in Kenya.
Yes.
So everybody in the world is concerned that there is a crisis in Kenya. So it's very disappointing that there are a number of leaders in Kenya who actually don't see that as a crisis. If you've got, going back to malaria, if you're suffering from malaria, you go to a good medical doctor who will give you prescription. But if you believe in voodoo medicine and then you say it's going to die, then of course you're going to die as a human being. So there's no alternative. And the earlier President Kenyatta and Raila Odinga realized that they need to have a conversation, the better. Because believe you me, at the end of the day, the two are going to have a conversation. And I recall once they attended a service at the Old Family Basilica. And then Raila Odinga referred President Kenyatta in very good terms. He said, my brother. And the president said the same thing. So one wonders, how come these two gentlemen who refer to themselves as brothers cannot sit down and address the nation?
Have a discussion.
Because even for President Kenyatta, believe you me, wherever he is actually concerned that there's a crisis in Kenya. You cannot be seated at State House, a happy man. We are going to have Jamhuri Day at Kasarani, and then your political competition is planning to be sworn in or be inaugurated, whichever name they're using. That will not work. So when President Kenyatta said he's not going to have a conversation, that he's going to leave it to his deputy president, in my view, that will not enable Kenya make progress. If anything, it compromises our national prosperity. It compromises our national security interest. Because you need investors to come to Kenya. But a number of investors, believe you me, right now they're waiting at the Heathrow Airport wanting to know what is Raila's position on this. And Mark Bichachi indicated that Raila has got capacity to cause chaos. He's predicting anarchy, and I think his crystal ball is broken. But that's a guy that you need to pay attention to. Because for all the time Raila said he's going to do something, there are people who believe in him, they consider him to be a god. For some people, Raila is a religion. And I will not get tired of giving this example. When he came back from the US, some of his supporters who were on Jogoo Road, they said, whatever happens, they disrespected the policemen. When the policemen are using live bullets, they said, we are going to count the live bullets. How many are you going to kill? When they sent tear gas canisters, the people decided to inhale and exhale. When they were spraying them with the acidic waters, those guys removed their T-shirts. So it means that he's got supporters who don't care whether you are going to kill him. Who do not care whether when he comes to the street he's going to sleep on an empty stomach. And a number of them come to do the demonstrations as a sport because you see they're unemployed, and you're talking about some social indicators. These guys are unemployed. And that should even disturb the president, that you have guys who can come to the streets in the middle of the week.
I want to bring in Mark at this juncture. And the fact of the matter has been that even as we have these conversations, President Uhuru Kenyatta, in his speech after swearing in, said that his first sort of job after that point was to start to bring Kenyans together, create a bit of cohesion, because only then would we start to talk development. Because you can't have one part of the country that says it's working while the rest is not. And if you think about issues like taxation and that sort of thing, all these things are held hostage by the political conversation. If you look at the KRA, their targets, really woeful situation there, then what do we need to get right so that we can start to say that we don't have to be at this juncture yet again? If, as Dismas is saying, is correct, there will have to be a conversation at some point, then why not have it sooner rather than later?
I think if we listen to the president carefully, it is not a matter of lack of a conversation.
It
is which conversation are we having that's actually problematic. And And the truth of the matter, that is the key question that we have to ask ourselves as a country.
Yes.
Now, if memory serves Kenya correctly, there was a point in our history where in the optimist index of the world we came number 2. That was in the year 2002.
Yes.
Now, the optimism was not held by a person called Kibaki. It was held in the idea that for once and for all, we would be able to deal with a monster called corruption.
Yes.
Okay? It is in that time when citizens stopped policemen, despite whether they were Kikuyu, Kalenjin, Kamba, Kisii, Luo, whatever it is that we were, we stood together and said, you know what? I'm not going to watch my driver bribe a policeman. We are not going to go to public office and apply for an ID card and bribe. Now, the issue about this country and what has been lost is the goodwill, not just of the political class, but also of the citizenry to face up with the corruptness of our society. Now, we have legislated about it. We have immense laws about it. We even enacted a constitution about it, created computer programs called Infamous to be able to manage how we procure things. And yet, corruption still runs rampant. Not just in Nairobi, in Kisumu, in Lamu, wherever it is in this country, there is specks and huge specks, for that matter, of corruption. Now that monster has bred itself into the thinking that anything that is done by an institution in this country cannot be trusted. In fact, so much so that today we stand within our political parties which misbehaved during their own nominations and then stand by them despite the internal rot. Now, how do you get this country back on track? The conversation that our president needs to have, the conversation that every Kenyan needs to have is how do we stop this country from behaving like we are a chokora nation? What do I mean by a chokora nation? Only chokoras, when there is food, fight over it. Only chokoras think about the moment before they think about tomorrow. Why? Because they've not been instilled the discipline that we need to have as a nation in order to be able to move forward. Now, the reality of the matter, if today we're having a conversation about how do we as a society, through our music, through our dance, through our speaking, through our cultures, whatever it is, how do we employ every tactic that we have to recapture 2002? Because in 2002, our intention was not to kick out Moi. Our intention was to kick out corruption. And the problem is this, that if you listen very carefully to Raila Odinga and what he said there, he says nothing about corruption. One of the things that I highly regret is that there was very little content, if at all, during the president's inauguration touching on corruption. And the fact of the matter is this: we have proven as a country that we can build roads and still be corrupt. We can do a lot of things and still be corrupt. Now, that corruptness is what leads to hopelessness. Why does it lead to hopelessness? Because corruption by its nature reduces the access to wealth by those who have access to power. And that's the issue. So as a country, we need to come back down and stop this NASA Jubilee conversation and have a conversation about our moral fiber and character as a nation.
I want to come very quickly to you, Hesbon. And the fact of the matter has been that we are told that to resolve our situation, our partners here is our political leaders, one way or the other. In the current situation, we are told that the economy, your livelihoods, the situation as we are, our peace is more important than trying to actualize what our political aspirations and dreams might be, accept and move on. Do you think that is where we should be?
I think looking at what you've said and the questions that you've asked, plus what the President Uhuru Kenyatta has just talked about in terms of having a conversation and the nature of conversation that he's willing to have with people, the biggest issue that emerges from all this for me is a misunderstanding, Look at the speech that the president gave during the swearing in. Look at how he's been talking about, being a president for all Kenyans. And then you juxtapose that with the actions that we've seen since then. Immediately after the speech, we had people being brutalized. Immediately, 2 weeks down the lane, now he's saying that he's not ready to have conversation. But I think there are two major things that we are missing. One is the idea that Raila wants, a Nusumkati or dialogue with, the Jubilee leadership, and specifically President Uhuru Kenyatta. And I think that is a misnomer. That is not what he's looking for. The issue here is there are Kenyans who believe that their aspirations, their future, their hopes, their economic well-being, their security is vested in the person of Raila Amolo Odinga. So to the extent that these people still believe that it is only through Raila that they can realize their aspirations, President Kenyatta, as a philosopher king that he is, should rise beyond the advice from his advisors and look at these people. Now, because as a president, you can't reach every other common mwananchi on the ground, you need to picture a situation where how can this wananchi on the ground perceive you to be addressing their issues? And today in Kenya, the only way that these many people who believe in the NASA cause, who believe in Raila Amolo Odinga, can see their aspirations as being met by this government is if President Uhuru Kenyatta reaches to them. And there is only one way to reaching these people, to reach to Raila Odinga, not to dialogue with Raila Amolo Odinga on the basis of who gets power or what is to be done, but to dialogue with Raila Odinga in such a way that the people who believe that their aspirations can only be met through Raila Odinga will perceive that dialogue to be enshrining what they believe in. And then the second thing is to now go ahead and actualize this.
Yes.
Because it is not a question of what people perceive. Truth be told, somebody might say that you are divided. 23 million NASA, 23 million Jubilee. No. Even this, in these two categories of people, there is another divide of those who are enjoying the trappings of power and what comes with it, and the hustlers who are just struggling to make ends meet. The guys will come to the street, and if they are coming because NASA called them to the streets, they are coming because they believe that being on the streets will bring them closer to their aspirations. But there are also sufferers on the other side of the political divide who will not come to the streets because the streets will help them, but they will come to the street with another agenda, that coming to the street will help them get mkate and take home, coming to the street will help them loot. And if you look at it critically, if President Uhuru Kenyatta is going to reach out to Raila Amolo Odinga, he's not going to reach out to him because of the people who support NASA. It is because of the many Kenyans who have these frustrations, the many Kenyans. And there's this idea of waiting. You know, it is always good while we're waiting for something. And there is a scholar in literature who talks about it was all good while we were waiting. I think it is Michere Mugo, you know, that we were waiting for the matunda ya Uhuru, and it was so good. But then we are from our Uhuru celebration, we are going back home, and we are still in this disenchantment, this disillusionment, that we are going home without this fruit. And there are so many Kenyans who are going back home after President Uhuru's inauguration. There are so many Kenyans who will go back home after Raila Odinga's swearing in on 12th, and they will still be disillusioned. Dear Mr. President, these are the Kenyans you need to speak to.
Well, we now, of course, want to proceed to a short break, but I want to put it to you that from the context of what he said, then we'd say that Raila Odinga then speaks for the person who's disenfranchised, be he Kikuyu, Swahili, Kamba, Luo, all tribes across Kenya, and then that this conversation is about the haves and have-nots. Very quickly.
I actually don't think so, because you see, you can be perceiving something but probably wrongly. Now, we've just stated, my last statements were about inclusivity and exclusivity. And we say these guys are also equally guilty of practicing politics of exclusivity. So the people who probably think what he's saying might be wrongly thinking so. But the thing is, to them it's reality because they believe it. What I want to address is what the president said, and probably what I understand of it.
Very quickly.
You know, the president, the one thing that the president is very clear is that we are not going to discuss a repeat election. And the main reason why he made reference to his deputy William Ruto is because it is very clear in his mind that the next electoral contest will be in 2022. And I think on that I want to agree with him. And I think it is actually good for him to come out clearly on that particular matter, so that when NASA is making its demands, and when NASA followers are also following up what their leadership is talking about, they can be clear that from the president's side, one of the things that he will not discuss is about a repeat election before 2022. I think that is just what he was talking about. Otherwise, these other things is severally and publicly declared that he is willing to discuss with everybody to move the nation forward. But one thing that I think is coming out categorically to state is that it will not be about going back to the ballot. So for that, it's important for him to be understood from that context because everybody is making their demands. So for him, he's coming out clearly that even if we are going to be discussing, we are going to be discussing about moving the country forward, but not going back to the ballot. That's why he's saying, siasa ilifanya nini? Not the kind of siasa that Dismas is talking about. That one, in a democracy, you cannot avoid that. That is what a democracy is all about. But about going back to an election before 2022, I think that is what the president is very categorical about. That is what I understood.
Yeah, so in the essence of what you're saying, Kavemba, that then roundly brings us to the conversation around the People's Assembly, the actualization of what the people want through means such as that, either extra-constitutional or constitutional. And then, of course, the fact of the matter that with devolution came several things that were set out. Have we been able to live up to those? Have the gains been rolled back? After the break, we want to come and discuss things like political freedoms, the arrest or maybe abduction of David D and what it points to. And the fact that if people then feel that they are not able to achieve what they want through the Constitution, are they then at liberty to exercise their power in other ways? That, of course, is after the break. Of course, that discussion continues here. We try to speak into, well, the conversation around what exactly is going on, what the expert perspectives are, and give you analysis that will enable you make a decision one way or the other. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes here on this Sunday edition. Do stay with us.